pointing more towards you. Yeah. Okay. So first up, if you were asked the question, who are you? What would your answer be?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. Because we are so many things, and throughout life we change. So who am I? In one respect, I can say, yes, I'm a mother. I can say I'm a psychotherapist. I can say I'm an older woman. I can say I'm a feminist. I can say that I'm a soulful person. I am a multiplicity of things, as are all human beings. We are essentially, as far as I'm concerned, emotions wrapped in a bag of skin. And those determine who we are at any point in time.
So you're just a bag of emotions?
Well, we all are to a huge extent. You know, that's the idea that our intellect drives everything. You know, I am going to do this. I've decided that this is the way it's going to be. And because I've decided that, whatever it might be, that is the way it is a nonsense. From my perspective, we are driven by our unconscious. We are driven by many things that, if we don't come to know them in our lives, they can live our lives for us. When you ask, who am I? How do you know at any one time that you are functioning out of you, whatever that might be? Or if you are functioning out of unconscious, repetitive responses.
Okay, so again, who are you?
Well, I can't give a specific answer to that.
So, you don't know yourself?
I do know
your
myself.
drives?
I don't even like to think about the drives anymore, because they were the first sort of language that Sigmund Freud used to talk about the libido.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, has changed in a great many ways. We are not just driven by drives. We are driven by relationship. And that is something that has developed, the understanding of that for a human being, that interaction with others, how that actually determines who we are, is more and more important. So when you say, who am I am a mixture of many, many things. At this point in time, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you about whatever it is that we're trying to define. But I can't say that I am a this or I am a that.
No.
Any more than anybody. You know, if somebody came to see me, for example, if I was to immediately determine this person as a this or a that, there would be no point in them having come to see me when I'm doing my work as a psychotherapist. You know, we are not one thing. We oscillate. We move. I am a 63-year-old woman. I have been a psychoanalytic psychotherapeutic practitioner for 20 years. I have studied for many, many years. But is that me? It's part of me. But it's not me. Me, I even wonder if there is such a thing as me. There is this essence that is in this body. But I don't particularly... It's not... it's not actually locked into this body. When this body dies, that essence goes elsewhere.
Okay, so then, in the sense of your work, how would you suggest that somebody can know themselves?
Primarily through giving oneself the time and the right space. And when I say right space, it's whatever is right for an individual, whatever kind of therapy works for them. And there's many different ways of doing that. But to give oneself that space and time for reflection, and doing that with another, is what is primarily most helpful. In that space, one can begin to explore. Because intellectually you can say to yourself, yes, I want to do this, I want to find out who I am, whatever that means. But it's no simple task. The intellect may want to do all of this, but our psyche has spent a lifetime protecting us from certain things that are too much for us to manage. Most often, again from my perspective coming out of childhood, when a child was not emotionally mature enough to be able to manage whatever the incidents were. And I'm not necessarily talking about terrible instances of abuse, sexual abuse or physical abuse. There's specifics, but there's a multitude of other ways in which a child is traumatized and hurt and damaged long before they have the emotional wherewithal to manage all of that. And that ends up becoming part of our life and determining how we function in life. So when you come into a therapy, whilst intellectually you think, yes, this is what I want to do, all of those parts of psyche that have protected us for a lifetime against what we couldn't manage when we were very young, they all come into the picture. They don't just go, okay, we'll do it now. It's a very complicated process, which is why when you really decide, when you really commit to coming to try to understand something of who you are, you need to do it with another. You cannot do it by yourself.
But what if we're not talking about therapy?
And what was the question again, if you're not talking about therapy?
How do you know yourself? Not anything to do with therapy. And did you give yourself the time and the space necessary to get to know yourself?
The only way that I came to know myself was through the process of study and therapy.
You didn't know yourself when you were young?
No, I knew certain things about myself, but I didn't really. I had no idea who I was when I was younger. None whatsoever. I thought I did. There was a facade. There was the person that functioned in life. But was that really me? Well, again, it comes back to the question. We are fluid. And some of those parts were me at that time. They were what I knew of me when I was younger. And as we grow and as we live and experience and interact with others, we find out different parts of ourselves. But we don't become something determined. And it's really important to understand that. The idea that it's like people searching for an it. If I find out what it is that caused X, Y, Z, then everything will be fine. It's a nonsense. We are fluid as human beings, and I think that more people need to understand that more. That we are constantly in the process of becoming.
Okay, so how about this? The personal versus the professional. In the role of a therapist, is there a clear separation? Can there ever be? Should there even be?
Those are very good questions. It's very, very difficult. That's part of why one does a training, because you have to know very clearly where you end and the other begins. If you are not aware of that, then you, in the work as a therapist, you can cross boundaries which are not going to be helpful at all to the process. So, yes, I am very strongly identified as a psychotherapist, but again, that's not all I am. And what I have found over the years, it's like when I first began, I was quite fundamentalist about the whole thing. I almost like I wanted to proselytize about psychoanalysis. And there was too much of me in what I was doing. I have learnt over the years, and I have hopefully matured so that that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't mean that I am not stirred, triggered, although I can't stand that word, hurt, feel empathy, feel pain, feel joy for another. I can feel and experience all of those things. But I have to keep them in their place. They are the experience of the other, and I can use those experiences that I have, say somatically, I can use that to gain a better understanding of somebody who comes to see me. And we don't want to go into those sort of details right now, but that is known as the transference and the countertransference, and it's valuable for the work.
Okay, so therapist as healer. Myth, aspiration, or danger?
Again, it can be dangerous if you don't understand where you end and the other begins. If you haven't undergone your own analysis, then, and I am a great advocate of that, then it can be dangerous. Because if you don't understand what it is that is, as I said a moment ago, the feelings that are stirred in me by somebody, they talk about a certain something and it moves me very deeply. Now, is that just because that is their experience, or is there something of my own past, my own experience that comes in? I have to be very clear about that. What is what? So to be a therapist, one has to always exercise caution and continuously work on understanding where you are in your own process of growth.
Okay, but we're looking at therapist as healer.
Well,
so outside of those, like the safety kind of mechanisms, do you even think that that's real? Are you facilitating an experience and a growth, or would you see yourself as a healer in the more traditional, like shamanic sense? Is there a mythology around therapists being a healer within the therapeutic community?
Yes.
Or is it just an aspiration, like people like to think of themselves like that?
Well, again, these are great questions, but if it depends on it depends on how you actually, if you think of yourself as some sort of healer of men, women, some sort of guru type, then that's grandiose. That is serving nobody but the person who thinks that. And then, of course, there are many aspects of working as a therapist where one is perceived as that by the person who comes to see you, and that can be a very positive thing. And there is healing that occurs. Most definitively there is healing that occurs, both for a therapist, for myself, and for the person who comes. There is the notion that many, of course, know about the mythological concept of Chiron, the wounded healer. And that is really the symbol for an analyst therapist, the wounded healer. It is only through one's own wounding and the understanding of that one can come to anything remotely resembling a healer. But all of these words, we have to be very careful, how we use them. And if somebody is flying a flag and saying, I am a this, who are you? I am a this, I'm a healer. I would be very wary. That's not to say that I don't believe healing occurs, because it absolutely does.
So you mentioned being wounded as possibly something that leads you towards training as a therapist, because you are searching for healing yourself. Why did you train to become a therapist, but not on a practical level, but in terms of your own experience as being human?
I had the opportunity, after I've completed my undergraduate degree, I could have gone on and done a master's in psychology and, gone on further in the academic field. But it just, when I spoke to people who were offering these various courses, universities, it did not touch my soul. It did not resonate with me at all, that particular way of thinking. I mean, I admire it, I respect it, but it just doesn't. I am somebody who is very fond of myth, who loves the idea of human story from the very beginning of humanity, coming to know that we are part of this ongoing tradition of living human beings. And so I was looking for something other than that kind of very focused, I suppose linear focused way of coming to understand the human condition. And I came across psychoanalysis. And it ticked all the boxes for me. At that time, the concepts that I was learning, the lectures that I was listening to, the people that I was meeting, the books that I was reading, it was just nurturing me. It was giving me so much that it was feeding my soul. That's what it was doing. It was giving to parts of me that had been living in a desert. And all of that, I don't regret for 1 minute doing any of those studies. I mean, I'm very grateful for the fact that I did, because all of that is some of what has brought me to being the woman that I am today.
So you speak about the intellect as opposed to?
I love the intellect too. Let's not make any mistake about that. But when, and that's not a simple question to answer.
No, so what is...
But
what is the other? So you've got the intellect.
Well, the intellect, of course, is what everybody will have their own idea of what that is. But again, it comes back to that notion of the linear way of looking at things. The other is a much more, as far as I'm concerned, human-based. It's like an encompassment of what it is to be human. It's philosophy. It's psychoanalytic theory and practice. It is literature. It is mythology. It is a multitude of other things that make us who we are. It is story. It is not just about X plus Y equals whatever that might equal. It is so much more. There is more. It's poetry. It speaks to the spaces that lie in between. It listens to the language that is not spoken. It tunes in to the humanity of the other.
So in yourself, you have been created with all these different elements. What has gained the upper hand in importance as you've gotten older in the way that you work? Do you view things intellectually like you did? Or are you now listening to people in a different way? Or are you working on a completely different plane altogether?
I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, I can answer it in some ways, that you're constantly, again I come back to this, you're constantly changing. And as a practitioner, you're constantly changing. You don't, for example, qualify and that's it, you stay at that point. Through the experience that you have over the years, and I've been doing this for 20 years, so of course you change. You hear things, you're very finely attuned. Your senses, all of your senses, are very finely honed to what is going on in your encounter with another. But, for example, whereas when I began practicing, there was a way that I had learned this was how one was supposed to be. You know, a psychoanalytic psychotherapist behaves like this, you know. And I very much followed the school of being, the tabula rasa, blank screen. I would sit there and I would listen. I wouldn't say terribly much. And that's how I was for quite a number of years. But as I've become older, that has changed. And it's not that I speak a great deal, but my mode of interaction with my patients has changed. I am much gentler, I think, with both myself and with the patient. Because the more I thought, and I had various experiences which I won't go into, but the more I thought of somebody coming and this person, me, sitting there completely blank and just allowing them to speak, I spent a lot of time considering how that would be, because I had my own analysis, and my analysts, while they were silent, they weren't necessarily quite so rigid. And I think, probably if I'm honest, that rigidity was part of a way of being that I had that no longer serves any purpose whatsoever. It's a way of holding on to something. So rather than being myself in the work, I am the tool, if you will, rather than being that, I was being something that I thought I ought to be. Mm-hmm. But I think also that's something that when you begin, that you have to do. You have to have a structure to work out of, to gradually evolve and develop into the practitioner that you will be.
Okay, so following on from the idea that you're coming from a more human, less linearly intellectual place, on what level of perspective do you view the issues people come to you with? As in, is there a karmic perspective that you believe in that informs your work? Or do you look purely at them as a result or consequences of their experience, like what you've talked about so far? Like, can we talk about the deeper elements, the spiritual elements? What perspectives do you view them with?
Well, I don't, it's not that I don't consider in myself and my ways of thinking about the human condition, I don't discount karmic issues, but I don't bring that into the therapeutic space.
And it's just an example of a perspective that you could take. So what perspectives do you take?
Well, primarily, I think it's about human suffering. And rather than putting names onto things, if somebody is suffering, they are in pain. And that is evident. So I want to come to understand as best I can, through them being able to tell me as best they can what it is that has brought them to this place. To come to understand how somebody has come to be the person they are today, right now. There's
So,
I don't like putting labels on things. I really dislike that. This, whoever comes, you know, whoever I see, this is a person. This is a person who's had a life's experience. They are not the same as anybody else. It's no good looking, for me, looking at a book and saying, oh, this person is a this or a that or the other. I'm not interested in that. I want to know who this person thinks they are, how they have come to this place where they are suffering enormously, where life is very, very hard for them. And yes, there's a multitude of reasons. There's, you know, socioeconomic, there's, you know, there's sexual questions, there's more than I could even begin to talk about. But primarily for me it's about human suffering and finding a way to be with that and assist in whatever way I can.
So it's both a very broad human experience perspective as well as a completely individual, everybody being unique perspective.
Yes.
Do you see any journey between do you see any connection between your journey as a therapist, the changes that have occurred in the way you practice that you spoke about before, and your journey through life on a personal level?
Yes.
Discuss.
Doing what I do for a living is because, initially going into it, was because of my own life experience and my own wounding and suffering, and the extent of which I didn't really understand. I didn't know. We can't know because we do whatever we can to not know things. These two aspects of my life, one is intrinsic to the other. I would, if I was no longer working as a therapist, I would miss aspects of. There is a unique intimacy that occurs when you work at this level of depth with another person. It is a relationship like no other. And it gives to both therapist and patient. It has gone a long way, all of those understandings that I've come to and forgotten, because you come to things and you think, oh yes, I've got a handle on that, but with something else, with someone else, you don't understand whatever that was at all. It's no good thinking that you know. The instant you get to that place that you think you know, you might as well forget it. Because you don't know. You can intuit, you can project all you like onto another, what you think this person is or what is happening for them, but you don't know. Which is why you sit and you allow the person to tell you, not you telling them.
And so if we do look at therapist as healer, do you feel like being a therapist has healed you?
I would say yes. That would be a resounding yes.
And what aspects of it? Is it through witnessing other people's suffering that you're able to come to terms with your own?
I don't know about that. I don't know about that at all. I think that part part of it is, and I can't fully answer that question, but I think part of it is that in what I was saying to you earlier on about one having to know where one is, who one is at that moment, in order to be able to be present for the person who's sitting there with you, who has given you their trust. That coming to know oneself in those moments is one of the greatest gifts that I have encountered as far as my own healing is concerned. Because there's no airy-fairiness, there can't be any ambivalence. I'm not saying it doesn't occur, but I'm aware of things like that when they do. So I am more, I suppose, in one way, it's almost as if I am more steeped in myself, whatever that is, in that moment, while I am doing the work, than I am at any other time.
You said that you wrote a piece when you were studying called "Is Self Synonymous with Soul?" Let's move away from this, looking or speaking as a therapist. Would you say that your experience as a human being up until now has taught you about what soul is and what self is, and has that knowledge been brought to you through your work in therapy, I guess?
I suppose, thinking of that was the title of my undergraduate thesis, and I mean, how naive, really, when I think about it now. I mean, that shows where I was. You asked me the question.
Well, you hadn't looked at Buddhism yet, obviously.
No, exactly. But, I mean, I had, but in a very superficial way. I hadn't, there was no depth to anything.
Well, you started out talking about the separation between the soul that is there when you die, that there's this essence. So, would you say, nowadays you'd say no, self is not synonymous with soul?
Absolutely, I would say that, yes. Yeah.
And so, like, can you talk about how you came to discover that, and on a personal level in your spiritual journey?
It's an ongoing process. It's sort of, I feel very deeply connected to spirit, to source, to the Divine Mother, to whatever you wish to call that which is everything, and which we are just parts of. Without that, my younger life was very, very difficult. Again, I'm not going to go into that, but if I hadn't had that to hold on to, and that's what I was doing at those times when I was younger, it was my refuge, it was my strength. It enabled me to function from one day to the next. I don't know that I knew that then, probably I would say I didn't. But the older I become, the more that I am grateful for coming to understand increasingly that I am part of everything else that is. When I look at others, and I do this walking down the street, I do it in the supermarket, I do it when I go to the cinema, I think, that's me. That's me. Thee within me, me within thee. And I see it all the time. So the distinctions that people attempt to make, you know, this person is this and this person is that. And, well, they are all me. I am all them. It's really quite simple.
Should we pause it?